Hello and welcome to the Centre for Brexit Studies YouTube channel. I'm joined here by David Hearne, who's a researcher here at the Centre for Brexit Studies. So David, the biggest news of the day is that government is to ask the Queen to suspend Parliament. So what are your thoughts on this?
I'm very surprised, I have to say. I will make a confession here. I did not think that they would go through with this. I thought that particularly after the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill was passed, I thought that they would try and refrain from proroguing Parliament. I will be absolutely blunt, I thought it was off the menu, so I am as surprised as anybody that they are actually going through with this, and I think there'll be an awful lot of very, very angry people looking at this going ahead.
So what do you think is Boris's and his new Parliament's actual thought process behind this? And what is it that they're actually trying to do?
I think it's a fairly flagrant attempt to try and ensure that he rams through some form of Brexit, whether that's a question of going back to Europe and getting some kind of minor changes to the backstop made, or whether it's a question of trying to force through a no deal. It's certainly a pretty flagrant attempt to bypass Parliament, and I have to say that historically that's quite worrying.
Now, the idea of shutting down Parliament has obviously caused some controversy this morning, with many saying it would stop MPs being able to play their democratic part in the Brexit process. So just how undemocratic actually is this move?
Well, I think there's certainly some people who want some very real answers to the questions that are raised by this. I think the assertion of James Cleverly, the chairman of the Conservative Party, that it's simply normal for the government to shut down Parliament can be roundly dismissed. I think that's nonsense, given when it's occurring and how it's occurring. It's obviously been very well timed, so that argument just does not hold water in practice. I am not a constitutional lawyer, but my understanding is that there would at least be some attempt to challenge this. Whether that goes through the courts or whether that goes through some form of parliamentary procedure, I don't know. But my understanding is that there would be a legal challenge to this. I think Shami Chakrabarti, Baroness Chakrabarti, has suggested that she believes that it would not be constitutionally okay, and that there might be a successful legal challenge to it. Obviously, the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, seems to think that it is legally watertight. As I say, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but it certainly seems that it's likely to be challenged. But yes, it is flagrantly anti-democratic insofar as it stops elected representatives from having their say on how Brexit takes place.
So how do you think the Queen will be approaching this? And has this happened before? And if it has, when did it happen?
So the Queen, I think, will simply follow the advice of her ministers, and I think anyone who is relying on the Queen to stop prorogation is probably barking up the wrong tree. I think she will definitely she will simply act on the advice that she's given. So, and my understanding is that any legal challenge would be to the nature of that advice, and not to the fact that the Queen exercises her power in proroguing Parliament. So I think the Queen will want to avoid being dragged into this, and will literally just do what her ministers suggest.
And has the Queen been ever, dragged into anything like this before?
Not really of this nature. There have been attempts to kind of get round parliamentary difficulties. I think in 1948 there was a very, very short parliamentary session of around 10 days in order to push through reforms against the will of the House of Lords. Again, there's some questions. In 1997, John Major technically finished the parliamentary session at the end of his premiership somewhat earlier than he had to. Those who were around back then will remember an unusually long general election campaign, 6 weeks. But yeah, I mean, this is very, very unusual, if not unprecedented.
So can we almost be certain then that we will be leaving the EU without a deal in October?
No. I think at the moment Nothing is certain. I think the chances of there being a no-deal Brexit have gone up. I think that the reaction of sterling falling against the dollar and the euro today suggests that the traders on the stock exchange feel likewise. Certainly it's a risk that's grown. That does not make it a certainty. There are 2 or 3 possible routes that might be used to leave either with a deal or via some other route. I think it's clear that Johnson is performing a 2-pronged attack. He is simultaneously trying to denude Parliament of its ability to stop him acting, and also seeking to quite narrowly adjust the existing withdrawal agreement, so only making changes to the backstop. If something happens that he is then able to bring back to Parliament, there is a possibility that Parliament could ratify that, and the UK would leave with a withdrawal agreement on the 31st of October or shortly thereafter. Alternatively, it is still possible that parliamentarians will find a way to block Johnson. There is likely to be at least some kind of legal challenge to this. Whether it's successful or not, I couldn't say. I'm not a lawyer. But it's also quite possible that parliamentarians will act in the few days that they have in September in order to bring down the Johnson government. And what happens there is anyone's guess, but I certainly would not be surprised to see parliamentarians try and reassert parliamentary control over the procedure.
Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you.